Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if the Norman conquest of England failed. First, let's discuss why this actually happened. There has to be a reason for it, right? Well, if we look into history, it is generally concluded and accepted that William the Conqueror concluded the conquest of England at around 1066. By then he was able to get the English crown. He was the Duke of Normandy but had claims on the English throne through his family connections, one of which was Emma of Normandy, who was the sister of Richard II, who himself was the Duke of Normandy. Edward the Confessor, the son of Emma and Ethelred, he was childless, and it is also generally accepted that William the Conqueror took this as reason why he wanted to conquer England, because of the childlessness of Edward the Confessor. Not only that, England was facing in the year 1066 a double invasion. The Norwegians, they came from the north, and the Norwegians under King Harald Hardrada followed their own goals and had their own claim somehow on the English throne as well. The most famous battle of that front was the Battle of Stamford, under which the armies of Harold Godwinson came out victorious. Unfortunately for him, the victory was very costly, and later on he lost the Battle of Hastings, and it is also said that he too died during the Battle of Hastings. However, this remains unclear, but let's just go with it. The outcome, as we know, was that William the Conqueror became then the King of England. He brought his Norman noblemen into England, Norman immigrants, who intermarried then also with the English population, or the Anglo-Saxon population at that time. French as court language became also very popular, and English per se, England and Britain, they changed on the long term. After the conquest of England, Wales and certain parts of Ireland would fall under his or his successor's rule. But what if all of that changed? What if the Norman invasion of England failed? The point of divergence I propose is that Harold Godwinson would somehow use the spread of the rumor about William the Conqueror's death to his advantage. It may confuse the enemies, it could also boost the morale of Harold's armies. Perhaps it could have been enough to just beat the invading armies by luring them into the forest or places that they couldn't easily just, take over and use their cavalry. Other people claim that William was very lucky and that the spearmen of Harold had the advantage on the battlefield, but that the fake withdrawal tactic was responsible for Harold's loss. Afterwards, his armies got caught up because they had their guards down and they got hammered. England, after the invasion, would have suffered a lot, but Harold Godwinson would go down into history as Harold the Great. The result of it is that first, all of England would stay more Germanic. The French culture won't have the same influence as it did in OTL, and the English foreign policies would be less obsessed over France for obvious reasons. This is bad news for Scotland and Ireland. After a few years, Harold the Great could go on and conquer Wales and start to take some parts of Scotland and Ireland. In this alternate timeline, the British Isles would be unified much earlier and could thus protect themselves from future invasions, especially from the Danes or the Norwegians, who would be busy with their own things later on. What would happen to France? France may not suffer from the devastating wars with the English, but the French would have other wars instead, which could be known as unification wars. But these wars wouldn't be as costly and as damaging to the population, and thus the French population would be much higher than even in OTL. Around the year of 1100 or 1200. Many local duchies or counties did their own things, had their own policies, and this of course would not really sit well with the alternate French king. As a result, the French crown would try to make sure that they dominate all of France, and that the dukes and princes below of them would be more obedient, and that they would actually do what they are told to do. It sounds easy, yes, and even very obvious, but it would be a very lengthy process for the French crown to establish themselves as, again, the most dominant force within France. Nevertheless, France will become the most dominant kingdom of Europe, and the French influence would show that in many ways. The Crusades would go on and also see a different departure. The Crusades, they would still happen in a different way though. Many of these smaller French dukes whose predecessors were almost powerless, they would participate in the Crusades Many of these smaller French dukes where their predecessor lost their lands or also their ranks, they would then participate in the Crusades because they would like to get more lands. And with a more united France, the Crusade could be more organized in a more effective way. The Crusades will still fail for obvious reasons again, but France could hold much longer to some lands and even conquer Egypt, for instance, or at least weaken it very considerably. The Mongols, not facing a big resistance in the Middle East, and especially in that area, well, they would just go on and Egypt might be even taken by the Mongols. And this means that we would see a Mongol dynasty in Egypt. As a result, I also don't think that the Fourth Crusade would then go to Constantinople. The Mongols would focus more on Egypt, and this would not only give Byzantium some chance to survive longer, but it would also give the Hungarians a time to shine. This would have another result. Austria would just become one of many German states, just like Saxony or Bavaria, for instance. It would never be strong enough to block a German unification, or it could actually be the force to support a German unification. The British Isles being united and not having claims per se in France won't mean that there won't be wars between France and Britain. No. England and France will have wars, but for different reasons. And in there I think that trade, for instance, could be a more obvious part. Which means that the English Navy would develop much earlier on, but also the French Navy would then be developed. The English could, for instance, have alliances with the Dutch or the Flemish territories which a united French kingdom would like to take. As a result, not only would the English get dragged into different wars, but the Germanic states could find themselves also at frequent war with the French, and this would result into a centralization or at least a stronger imperial authority within the Holy Roman Empire. This has also another interesting consequence. The Italian states would not rebel from the Holy Roman Empire and instead support the emperor in exchange for protection. The Dutch-speaking countries would find themselves between two fronts, but would eventually get tired of being thrown around and also get their independence. The English culture would be different, and we might not see the Tudor Renaissance nor the War of Roses and many other aspects which today define the very essence of English identity and even British identity. Instead, Harold the Great would be considered as the greatest Englishman, and most of Britain, including Ireland, would be pretty much Anglicized. I'm using that term instead of Anglophonicized, because Anglophonicized would already be too much French. The English would try to distance themselves from the Scandinavians, but look for a close relationship with the Dutch. The English language could become closer to the Dutch, Flemish, and at the end the English too would convert to Protestantism, because without the Norman invasion, Catholicism would never be that strong in England at least. Problems in Ireland, they could arise, but this depends on how much assimilated the Irish would be. Remember, all of Ireland would be for a much longer time into the sphere of influence of this alternate England. England at this point would still focus on trade, and they would become one of the earlier players when it comes to the colonization of the world. At this point, I can't predict whether they will be rivals with the Spanish or not, whether the Spanish will be in constant wars with the French. Will there be an earlier German Empire that has an alliance with the Spanish and wants to contain the French? And will that German Empire even include northern Italy? Would Hungary become a French ally? Well, one thing is for sure. England would have even better cards to become a global power. The geographical position is key. They would already have cleared up the British Isles earlier on, and trade was always important for an island like Britain. And that's where we leave it for now.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.